Welcome to the Artistic Foodies, the show that explores life through the lens of art and food. I'm Abbas Muhammad,
And I'm Irfan Raidan.
and today we're talking about how culture changes across space and time, using both food and music as the perfect examples.
We have a super special Shawarmaji tomb recipe, so make sure you listen all the way through. Our first guest, Mohammad Abutaha, is originally from Amman, Jordan, and he came to the Bay Area to study engineering. But after craving the popular food of his homeland, the shawarma, and not finding a Jordanian equivalent in the Bay, he decided to get into the restaurant business himself. Let's hear more about his story from the Shawarmaji himself.
If you were a superhero, the shawarma superhero, what is your backstory and what did shawarma mean for you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, growing up in Amman, Jordan, if you're ever looking for a snack, most of the time it's going to be shawarma. Like, sure, we have hummus, we have falafel, we have all these things, but shawarma is definitely the thing that everybody seeks out. And there's like a restaurant in every single neighborhood, on every single street, around every single corner. So growing up in Jordan, like I used to eat shawarma at least 2-3 times a week, especially when I got older and I was in high school. You know, when you stop like eating at home and start like trying to go out and stuff like that. Yeah, shawarma was like one of the things that I ate constantly. And then moving to the Bay Area, it was just the situation where this food that was a really like central, like critical part of my life in Jordan was doesn't exist here. And then also getting constantly disappointed every time I would like try shawarma here, which is not to say that like the shawarma here isn't delicious, you know what I mean? Like they are delicious, but just to me, like they're delicious chicken sandwiches, you know what I mean? They're like they miss the certain characteristics of shawarma that I grew up eating. One thing led to another. I decided to become a cook, and then like I worked my way as a dishwasher. Like I started working as a dishwasher, worked my way up. Took me 6 years, and then alhamdulillah, I have an amazing brother who helped support me, and we opened up Shawarmaji.
Mashallah. No, I love that. So it's a superhero name, Shawarmaji, superpower making awesome shawarmas, the backstory, eating.
Yeah, basically.
Now, and I love the backstory because it has all the elements. You know, you're looking at, okay, I wanted good food, couldn't find it, did it myself. And then you have, you know, the perfect superhero story from washing dishes to having, man, where's that sticker? You got to stick it with your face on it. Like
Yeah.
you don't just have a restaurant. You got to stick it with your face on it. That's how you know you made it. You know what I'm saying? So no, I love the origin story. I love the backstory. Just to illustrate it a little bit more, take us through some of the flavors of your childhood. What are some things that you love that are like quintessentially Jordanian, and what makes a Jordanian shawarma Jordanian?
Like shawarma is originally Turkish. Turkish people are the people who invented all different types of kebabs and stuff like that. And one of those kebabs is the doner, or what we call shawarma, right? And shawarma is actually, I think, a Turkish word as well, right? And then that moved down from Turkey through Syria to Jordan, right? Um, we definitely in Jordan, I would say we do Syrian shawarma, right? And I would define my shawarma as technically it's Syrian shawarma, right? But what Jordan does is we took that shawarma and we just went crazy with it. Like in Jordan, we definitely have like the classics, but now like there's like people coming out with all different kinds of things, you know, just like riffing on shawarma and stuff like that. And it's because there's just like such deep rooted love of this food that, you know, we're just like next, you know, let's do it, let's keep on going, you know. And yeah, I mean, like it keeps evolving and changing and stuff like that in Jordan and Amman mainly.
I got a quick follow-up question on that one. So, we have our Facebook group called Bay Area Halal Foodies, and there's always a lot of discussion about, shawarma and the lack of shawarmas in the Bay Area. I mean, I happen to disagree with that, but, there's a lot of people have different interpretations. What do you consider like the authentic one? Is it exactly the way that you make it in your restaurant, or is it a little bit different than that?
I think it's very important when you say authentic to define authentic to who, right? Like authentic for me is what I make in Shawarmaji. Chicken with garlic sauce, pickles, adding fries is also very like common, and like a lot of people just do it back home without even asking, right? Your shawarma gets fries in it whether you like it or not. You know, the lamb comes with tahini, onions, and tomatoes, and that's authentic for like Jordan, right? These are the basic steps of like this is how you eat lamb and this is how you eat chicken. Now we go a little bit further with like adding the cheese and the hot sauce. That's also something that I took from a restaurant in Jordan. Like one of my go-tos that I'd always eat at. They were like one of the first people to put cheese and hot sauce in their shawarma.
So cheese is a bid'ah in the shawarma, or is it culture? Is it traditional?
Well, it's it's definitely a new thing. I mean, there are a lot of places like doing that now in Jordan. You know what I mean? Like there's a restaurant called Al Khal, which is in Amman in Rabia, right? And that was like the first place that I ever tried cheese and shatta in a shawarma. That's how I would order it all the time when I go there. There was other places putting cheese in their shawarma. There was even a restaurant putting like jalapenos and like pickled jalapenos in their shawarma. I think like the definition. I think the definition of authentic is really like a hard thing to define, especially with a food like shawarma, because like these are all Jordanian things, right? And if you go to Lebanon, right? In Lebanon, they don't even press the shawarma like we do. They use like the regular pita bread and they just roll it up like that, and that's how they serve their shawarma. The pressing of like the flatbread is more of a Syrian thing. That's why I say like our shawarma is more Syrian than anything else, is because like the Arabi style is a Syrian style. Like even in like Palestine, for example, they do more of like the pocket, right? And they put like the shawarma in like a thicker pita pocket, which also exists in Jordan. You know what I mean? Like Jordan is like whatever you got, we'll eat. You know, if it's like meat and sauce and something, we'll eat it, no problem. You know. Wow. But like that's definitely like different than like Lebanon, who do like the thinner pita, and Syria and Jordan. Jordan does like both, and like for example, Turkey, they do more beef than lamb. Everybody's just like completely different. I don't see my role as a chef as like creating weird and amazing new foods. You know what I mean? I feel like my role as a chef is to connect like back home food or like food that I grew up with to where I am right now, right? So the whole concept of like traditional versus like innovation, I'm definitely, I would say like a little bit more of a traditionalist, but I do love innovation, right? I feel like when it comes to like innovation and fusion and stuff like that, there needs to be a certain point. Like, yes, like for example, at Shawarmaji, right? We innovate and we try to like create new shawarmas, collaborate with different chefs with different backgrounds and stuff like that. But at the same time, we have that ground of like, this is what's traditional for where I'm from. You know what I mean? Like chicken shawarma is this. What we're making on this side is something new. You can, I mean, yes, if you want to call it shawarma, call it shawarma. You don't want to call it shawarma, don't call it shawarma, no problem. You know what I mean? But if you want a traditional chicken shawarma, we have it right here. You know what I mean? So it's very important for like, especially for people who aren't Arab or aren't familiar with shawarma, or you know what I mean, who get introduced to this new thing. that they understand what is a traditional before enjoying something that's not. You know what I mean? And just like kind of like comparing and contrasting to understand the relationship.
That's beautiful. So it's like you cannot have innovation without a tradition to stand on, but you also can't have tradition unless someone innovated it
Very true.
at
Yeah.
some point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think like if you look at a food like tacos al pastor, that's like traditional Mexican food.
Yeah.
But at one point it wasn't. I'd love for you to talk to us about that story about, shawarmas from the Middle East and al pastor in Mexico and what the connection is there, because it's such a big jump.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There was a large immigration from the Middle East to like Latin America and Southern America, like South America and Central America, right? And you get like pockets of like Arabs in like random places, honestly. And one of those random places was Mexico. And the word al pastor means the shepherd, right? And so, like, there was a large group of Lebanese immigrants in Mexico who love lamb and decided to make lamb shawarma. You know what I mean? And then, obviously, the Mexican people like enjoyed it, had fun with it, and then kind of like changed it little by little. I mean, it's really, I would love to like really get in, like understand the evolution of how, like, where things change, because when we're innovating food, right? It's such a gradual like change. So, like, when was the change from, like, for example, lamb to pork, right? Because like right now, most al pastor is pork, right?
Yeah, by definition.
But it ended. It began as lamb. You know. Also, like when I was researching some of the spices for al pastor, there's a lot of like, Middle Eastern spices like allspice, cumin, stuff like that, which are also used in Mexican cuisine, right? But then there's also like achiote and chili guajillo, right, which are like quintessential like Mexican ingredients, right? It just understanding the evolution and where things were added. Is something very interesting for me, but I wish I could. I wish I knew more about, But yeah, it's amazing to have like food come from Lebanon, from Turkey to Lebanon to Mexico, and then to the United States as like a completely different food than what it originated.
It's really interesting because I did a little bit of back research on the history of it. I think it was 19th to 20th century when the first immigrants came. This was during the time where Lebanon was not an independent nation. It was first part of the Ottoman Empire, and then it became, I think it was a British protectorate. And so they started coming 19th, 20th century. So we're looking at maybe like 100 years, give or take a decade. So, in the grand scheme of things, 100 years is actually a very short amount of time.
It's nothing.
To go from like halal hand slaughtered lamb shawarmas to like pork al pastor, that's like, but that's like what maybe 2 generations.
Yeah.
But what I found fascinating was that there weren't a lot of Muslims that were migrating, right? It was mostly the Christians, the Maronite Christians.
Like tacos árabes is like is more like shawarma than tacos, honestly, because they use this flour tortilla, right? It's not as like spiced and for lack of a better word, red as al pastor, right? Because like al pastor is very distinct because of like the achiote and the guajillo make it very red, right? Whereas al pastor really looks like traditional shawarma. I mean, not al pastor, sorry, arabes. Arabes looks like traditional shawarma, and it's also made in like a like hybrid pita tortilla situation, which is very interesting. Then you have al pastor, which is very interesting because of like you have the pineapple and like the more, what's the word for it? Like rainforesty like ingredients, tropical. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Tropical. the more tropical ingredients, right? Like understanding that and knowing that there's this relationship between like Arab cuisine and Mexican cuisine. When I first opened up Shawarmaji, I did a lamb al pastor, like really merging like a lamb shawarma and an al pastor sandwich, right? Or taco. We made like the lamb with like al pastor seasoning, and then in the wrap we had pineapple and onions and tahini, right? Which is a very like it's literally like a marriage of both wraps, right? And then we did it a few times. It was delicious, as the days passed on, and like I started thinking, and like I started kind of like creating like all these new different shawarmas. We used to have like an experimental Wednesdays where I would just go crazy with like different combinations. And then I decided, I was like, if I know, yes, I know about these like al pastor, you know what I mean? I've done research on it. I've seen YouTube videos or whatever of how it's made. Even though I've never had it myself because it's all pork. But what if we actually like reached out to an actual Mexican chef that can like help us with this? That's when I reached out to Devin from Tacos El Precioso, who I've had his food multiple times, and it's amazing. And he was like, "Yeah, sure, no problem, right?" And we went over like a few like different like combinations. One of the things was the chicken al pastor, which was his own like al pastor marinade. We marinated the chicken. We basically like used his ingredients and like his understanding of the cuisine and our like expertise of like making a skewer and putting and building like a shawarma skewer, right, and cooking it, and then putting it in a wrap instead of a tortilla, you know what I mean? Making it the way we make our wraps. We made some interesting stuff, One of them was the chicken al pastor that we made with him, which had toom instead of tahini, right? But also had his like tomatillo sauce, his grilled pineapple and pickled onions. It was like yes, these two things are al pastor, but one is like completely different than the other. One was definitely more Arab and Middle Eastern, and one was a little bit more Mexican. You know what I mean? The last couple of weeks, we also did a pollo a la diabla with him, right? Which is basically a salsa macha. Salsa macha is like a Mexican chili oil, right? And he makes his with like 6 different kinds of chilies, sesame seeds, and like garlic and stuff like that. And like this really amazing, like very flavorful and aromatic like oil that we marinated the chicken with. And then that, honestly, that like blew my mind, and I would have never thought to do that, And that's why I like reaching out to different people and different people who have like different thoughts than me and different backgrounds. And I feel like that's where like real innovation comes from, with like cooperation more than just like I'm thinking for myself kind of situation.
Right, because the shawarma never became doner kebab until a conversation was had, until an exchange happened. It didn't become shawarma, and shawarma didn't evolve into a million different kinds until these conversations happen. And it's not just a conversation between people, but you're talking to the land around you.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I like is garlic sauce, and I always ask for extra garlic sauce at every place I go to, and there's not too many places that make it very good, but your own one is very, very good. So tell us a little bit about how do you make yours? I mean, you don't have to give away your secrets or anything, but what's
Heard it here first.
what's the difference between yours and other ones? Like,
it's so funny because a lot of people ask me about like my secret and stuff like that, or don't give away your secrets and stuff. I was like, first of all, this is not my food. I didn't invent this. You know what I mean?
You didn't invent garlic sauce?
This food has been around for a long time. I'm like, a person in a line of like thousands of people who've made this garlic sauce before. This is, yes, my version, but like I don't own garlic sauce, So I'm always happy with like sharing how to make it. It's like one of those things that's so simple but really complicated at the same time. Because it's creating an emulsion, right? And an emulsion is the combination is mixing oil and water without it breaking, right? And that's how we get that like creaminess. To create the emulsion, you need an emulsifier, which in this case is garlic. How you make mayonnaise is with eggs. So the same concept, but instead of eggs, we're using garlic. So what we do, because we do it in like huge batches, so we just basically get a big pot and you put 18 pounds of garlic in there. Because that's what come in a case is 18 pounds, right? So we just put the whole case in there, peeled garlic. We get like, also like the type of garlic is very important. We get ours from like Christopher Ranch in Gilroy.
The garlic capital of the world.
Exactly, yeah. We put the garlic in the big pot. We put our salt, our lemon juice, and this is like something that I figured out. I want to say recently, but like when we opened up the restaurant. So when we're doing the pop-ups, I wasn't doing this, but after opening up the restaurant, is we add the water before adding the oil. Right? And because we're using an immersion blender, so it whips it up so fast that it doesn't really matter, right? Because the whole thing that you're afraid of is like after you put all these things, right? And you're blending it and you're mixing it, or like you're smashing it, or whichever technique you're using, you're adding oil very slowly, right? Because adding oil in the right ratio is what makes it stable, right? If you add oil too fast, it breaks the whole emulsification and it just doesn't work. You just basically end up with oil with bits of garlic in it. So basically, like once you put garlic, salt, lemon juice, and water, and you mix it all together, you make sure it's very fine and ground up, then you add oil little by little until you create this emulsification. And then you end up with toom.
Nice. This top secret recipe is right here on the Artistic Foodies podcast.
The real secret of this recipe is if your wife doesn't like garlic, this could cause issues in your marriage.
Oh, yeah.
You both got to be on the sauce. Just as a closing, I'd like to ask you kind of a outside the box question. If you had a chance to go back 10 generations to a predecessor of yours, to someone who's making the hottest shawarma of the time 10 generations ago. And if you got a chance to speak to a shawarma maker 10 generations from now, what would you say to these two different people?
That's a very interesting question. If I went to like obviously the oldest or an older like shawarma maker 10 generations ago, thank you. Like, that's the best thing that really like with all my heart, thank you for creating and like continuing this like amazing food that like really shaped my life. You know what I mean? Like it's so weird because it's such a common, food, like saying like burgers shaped my life, which is like
it shaped my body too. I love it.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's just been such an integral part of my life and also like, my career. Yeah. I mean, thank you. That's what I would tell them for somebody, 10 generations in the future.
They're probably going to be on Mars or something. So
yeah.
Different.
First of all,
flavor.
Is the meat, whatever meat that you're using, is it halal or what? What kind of meat is that?
Yeah, they're going to be doing the lab meat by then.
Oh yeah, sure. Probably.
Right.
The,
fake stuff.
Yeah. Let's hope we still have our lambs around in 10 generations.
Yeah, I was just like back in my day. We used to use real animals. Again, like it would just be awesome just to see like what they're doing and like or what the tradition is. What is traditional for them? That would be a really like interesting question.
I love it. That's really beautiful, and that's a very humble answer and a very righteous answer. We're sending gratitude to the ancestors and we're learning from the future.
Yeah.
And now for a quick break and a word from our sponsors.
Lahori Restaurant, located in downtown San Jose, serves authentic Pakistani and North Indian cuisine. Specialties include Lahori chana, chicken tandoori, goat biryani, and chicken charga, a whole roasted chicken cooked in their special spices and served on the weekends. For more info, check out Lahori Restaurant on Yelp or call them at 408 320 1221.
In this second part of our episode, we speak with Ronnie Malley, a master musician, multi-instrumentalist, playwright, and also a keen lover of shawarma. We asked Ronnie to take us on a journey through his life, but also through the world to see how the oud, a classical musical instrument, evolved as it traveled across the world, just like the shawarma.
What's funny is that, shawarma has also been a huge part of my life. Not only did I grow up helping my mom cater with, her food, I also grew up helping my uncle at his bakery. That's how I saved up enough money to buy my first musical instrument.
Oh, wow.
And it's actually a pretty good place to start the story because that's my interpolation between shawarma and music growing up. Because I was saving my money, working my uncle's Middle Eastern bakery to buy my first instrument, which was a guitar at the time. And all of that was while I was eating great shawarma sandwiches from Steve's. And, growing up, once I got that instrument, my dad was a musician already, and my brother is a musician. And it wasn't just food that got us into our culture and understanding our culture. It became music then. And so we kind of started a family band. And I didn't necessarily think that I was going to be playing Middle Eastern music or any world music at the time, mainly because I was listening to a lot of rock and roll, particularly that my cousins gave me a healthy dose of. And it was like heavy rock, and that's what I listened to. I thought that was my Americanness, being American. And I remember distinctly one day I was probably about 13, 14, and we were driving around in our pickup truck from the southwest suburbs of Chicago, and I was listening. My brother and I were listening to Slayer on the cassette deck. This heavy thrash group that, especially in the 80s and 90s, if you listen to that, people would look at you like, are you a devil worshiper? You're like, no, it's just this music. There's something about it, the power of it. And so we would listen to it. And then he just kind of said, okay, you like that and you're learning guitar. How about this? And he takes it out and he puts in a cassette tape of the Egyptian crooner, Abdul Halim Hafiz. This guy is like the equivalent of Mehdi Hassan,
Mm-hmm.
And so he puts in this cassette tape, and all of a sudden, guitar opens it up with this just huge orchestra of violins and everything. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? And he's like, listen, it's got guitar on it. And I was just sold right there. I said, okay, I see where we can blend these worlds together. That's an electric guitar, but playing Egyptian music.
From Slayer to Abdul Halim Hafiz.
From Slayer to Abdul Halim Hafiz, man. We can. But what's great is, I can play both styles. Or Abdul Halim. And thus the journey began, right? And it was an interesting one because through music you start to find, how do I discover my own identity? Am I fully Arab? And am I going to fully practice that, or am I fully American? Because in the 80s and the 90s, it was not uncommon for immigrant parents to speak only English with their children, to want their children to speak only English without an accent whatsoever. And part of the reason was, they wanted them to assimilate into the society, not to forget who they were, but you wanted to get a good job. You wanted to get ahead. You wanted to do what you needed to do. And I might have taken it for granted or just been too naive to recognize something like that. But I'm so grateful to my dad, who himself came here as an immigrant when he was 14. So his he speaks with a very little accent, if any at all. Went to high school here as well, and but still kind of kept up his tradition through the music. And if anything at all, that's what he passed down to us. And so we started playing guitar, and because my dad and brother are also both percussionists, and I just looked at him, and I started off as a percussionist myself, and I said, guys, one of us has to play melody in this family band here. And so my dad started to give us a lot of music from a variety of different places. We started to play Egyptian music, Lebanese, Syrian music, and before long, he would have my brother and I do a small show in between sets of when my dad's band would play at this restaurant they were playing called Beirut Restaurant. Beirut.
How old were you around this time?
I was about 14.
Incredible. Okay.
I was about 14 years old. But I remember the first experience I had on stage when I really made that shift was when my dad's friend, Najib Bahri, who's a master percussionist from Tunisia, came to our home, and they were having a barbecue. And I came back from my guitar lesson. He just sees me walking in with the guitar, and he's like, "Hey, kid, what are you doing? Come here." I said, "Yeah." He's like, "So you play guitar, huh? Okay, play this." And he just hums a melody to me, like da 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 da. And I'm just looking at him like, huh? It's not written in front of me. I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, figure it out. So eventually I plucked a few notes and I figured out what he was playing. You know, at the time I knew like 2 chords. You know, I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll figure it out. And so he just looks to my dad after that and he says, okay, now they must play Arabic music. I didn't realize what he meant was like, by providing this oral tradition, the way that you learn the music, by somebody saying it to you and repeating it, that was my first lesson in that. So that's what he meant by that. And I'm just thinking to myself, you know, this, at that time, 12, 13-year-old kid, I'm just like, yeah, maybe in a couple of years, I'm going to go upstairs and finish learning Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, you know? And I go upstairs and he comes back 2 weeks later and he's like, grab your guitar, your amplifier, and put on something nice. He put on this like kid suit, you know, and we get in the car and he goes and he literally throws my brother and I on the stage to play at a wedding with him for the next 6 hours.
6 hours.
Yeah, weddings are long. You're basically, you know, the Middle Eastern weddings too, and you know, just concerts in Asia in general. You know, they're long. They're not like these half-hour shows, right? And so we get on stage and play, and that was my first time on stage. I knew like 2 chords, but I had rhythm. And I'm playing these chords with distortion guitar in Middle Eastern music. But it was an experience. And fast forward many years later, my dad would take us to the restaurant with him. And my brother and I would go up as these 2 little kids learning all of this Middle Eastern music, Arabic music. And people were just kind of, I didn't pay much attention to it because we were having fun. But people were just enamored, like, wow, you guys are like learning your culture. You're doing it through music. And, you know, only in hindsight can I realize that, wow, that was probably the most important thing to really get me to know my language, to know my culture, to know my people, to know that there are other people in the Arab world as well that, you know, we met Christian Arabs, Jewish Arabs, Druze Arabs, Muslims from different sects, different denominations. And all of that was through the lens of music, which was really humbling, to be honest with you. So fast forward, you know, my dad said, okay, guitar is great. Your brother and you guys do a really great job on the stage. You know, and these little kids getting tips for, I didn't even have peach fuzz at the time, you know. And we're getting like tips and all kinds of stuff. And then my dad said, look, if we really want to move ahead with this family band, you should probably switch over to keyboards. And I said, okay, that's great. Let's get a keyboard, you know. And I was listening to a lot of Arabic music from the 60s and 70s, and I was really enamored by the organ sound, you know, these old synthesizers, which today people are like, oh, that's vintage. If you still have that, it's not worth quadruple the amount. But in the 80s and 90s, the digital realm started to really take over.
Yeah.
And folks were just kind of enamored by that. Look, this thing almost sounds like a trumpet. This almost sounds like a saxophone. And I'm like, if you really want a trumpet or saxophone, how about get a real one? But it's what the sound was. It was the sound of the 80s, even in music that we hear today from 80s pop music. But the reason that's relevant is that I was very stubborn in making the shift to the digital keyboards. And I wanted an organ, the kind that I heard being played on Abdul Halim's records, right? And the time that my dad had asked me was around the same time that we were playing at this restaurant, and now I was allowed to kind of join the band. And they were bringing this famous star from Egypt, and his name is Magdi al-Husseini. And when I heard the name, I was like, what? Because I would hear Abdul Halim and Kulthum speak his name when they were introducing the band. This is the guy who played with Abdul Halim, who played with Kulthum. And I'm like, I'm about to play with a legend. That's like, somebody coming to you and saying, hey, by the way, Aretha Franklin's coming and you're going to be playing with her. or something or Herbie Hancock is coming and you're going to be playing with him.
Oh my God.
Probably a more appropriate analogy. And I was 15 at that time and still on guitar. And he came with his big organ. He's like, Abdul Halim gave me this organ. And that's when it sank in really that my dad said, yeah, you should start playing organ. And he took me to his friend who was a drummer, an Armenian drummer that was in his band, Armenian Iraqi. And he had a replica of that organ. And he said, I'll give it to you. You have to go and get quarter tones on it because Middle Eastern music uses extra notes that exist between the white and black keys, if you will, quarter tones. You hear this in azan when people do the call to prayer as well. And so we got the organ, and it weighed about 110 pounds, but we would carry it everywhere we would go. And it was the replica of this guy's organ, Magdi al-Husseini, that Abdul Halim gifted to him. So I'm on like cloud 9. Now, mind you, all of this is before the internet. So the only way to really experience the culture, to experience and learn it, was by meeting people and meeting with them. So I was extremely fortunate and grateful that my dad's friends would give me these apprenticeships. And we would be able to, learn music as it was in Iraq, learn music as it was in Palestine, as it was in Egypt or North Africa, Morocco or Tunisia. And all of those experiences were just face-to-face, basically. So we get this keyboard and organ. And for the next few years, I make my shift, self-taught, took some piano lessons on organ. And we become a band that can take weddings and all kinds of stuff, and we get to choose the singer that we want. But more than that is because singers or vocalists or stars that would be coming from overseas, presenters here would not be able to afford to bring their entire group. So often they would bring like a ringer with them, a violinist or a guitarist or a percussionist, and the singer would come, and they'd get a pickup band here in Chicago. And more often than not, we would end up becoming that pickup band. So we ended up playing with like these stars like Magdi al-Husseini, Kazem al-Sahir, Tony Hanna, and all of these iconic names in the Middle East. And I would sit down with their musicians and get these apprenticeships. And it was just a beautiful thing.
Wow, that's so dope.
It was just about being in the right place at the right time. And we would play with them and perform with them and learn all of their songs. And so that experience lasted for the next, 10, 15 years. And we still continue to do that. And we still maintain these relationships with folks. Eventually, I made my shift over to the digital world. And I had to give up that organ. And I got into this digital keyboard. And I was probably about 16, 17 at the time. And I just came to this weird realization. It's like, I'm playing guitar. I'm playing keyboards. These are instruments, both of which were made in Japan at the time. I'm like, I'm playing Middle Eastern music on Japanese-made instruments. Something's just not right. It's not sitting right with me. I need something that's of my tradition. What instrument can I gravitate towards? And the oud seemed the most natural course. just because it's a stringed instrument. I already played guitar, and I can figure out most of it. And again, I got to come back to saying that I did not have internet. There was no internet at this time. There were no cell phones at this time, and I was learning.
The dark ages.
Well, that's all based on perspective. Because dark ages, it's a relative term, I guess. They called the dark ages during the golden age of Islam. They called that the dark ages. Yet that's when algorithms, that's when this instrument came about and eventually gave birth to the guitar, which is kind of where I'm going with this. In essence, I went backwards. I learned all this modern stuff to come back to my roots in many ways. Going from Slayer to Abdul Halim Hafiz.
That could be the name of this podcast episode, from Slayer to Abdul Halim Hafiz.
From the digital keyboards and the guitar to the oud, an instrument that has roots far back as 2,000 years ago. And so I kind of just made that decision that I'm going to do this just at least for me. I'll still play the keyboards and all that stuff because it's what's accepted in the weddings and what's accepted in the commercial world. But I needed to get right with myself and learn a new repertoire. And it was the greatest decision I made. It took me a while. As I said, being born before the internet, it was like there's no teacher readily available. So I had to teach myself a lot. And again, these apprenticeships were invaluable, And then begging people, if you're going overseas, please bring back music, please bring back sheet music or something, And I think I was in the Middle Eastern grocery stores on a daily basis because that was where you found all of the music, the tapes and the redistributors. Let's just call them that. We're not going to say pirating, okay? They were redistributors of music. And thank God they were, because there would have been no other way for me to get that music had it not been for people who'd set up shop, make duplications of cassettes, and redistribute them.
They were the Spotify of the olden days. I mean, artists still ain't getting paid from that.
Exactly. Wow. You hit the nail on the head. We are making like all this old school analog analogies, It's coming to be. And, so I picked this instrument up and I realized what I had been missing for a very long time in my life. So that same friend that my dad had, the Tunisian drummer who said they must play Arabic music, he's like, well, you're playing oud. Do you know the story of Ziryab? And I'm like, who? He's like, Ziryab, you have to know this guy's story. And so he proceeded to tell me. Ziryab was a 9th century musician born in Baghdad. And legend has it that he was a freed slave of African descent. And he was nicknamed Ziryab, which means blackbird, because of his dark complexion and his sweetness of character and clarity of his voice and his tone. He sang well, purported to have known over 10,000 songs. So he was a famous oud player, and he was under the tutelage of a court musician in the Abbasid Abbas, your namesake there, the Abbasiyin. Harun al-Rashid was the Khalifa at the time.
Harun al-Rashid, okay.
Yeah, so we're talking about, late 700s, early 800 AD, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Ishaq al-Mawsili is the musician who's in his court, who's also an oud player, and who happens to be Ziryab's teacher. So Ishaq, Harun goes to Ishaq and says, look, I've been looking for something that's just new. I need something new to hear. I need something to satisfy the soul. So even back in the 10th century, people were looking for this new thing, right? We're talking about traditional and not traditional. Well, here it goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he brings him, he says, I got just the guy for you, and brings him Ziryab. And presents him to him, and he says, this is my student Ziryab, and he's definitely got a beautiful voice. Nobody sings like him, and he plays like a whiz. He's like, okay, Ishaq, give him your oud, let him play for us. And he's like, with all due respect, I must play my own oud. And he gets his own oud out. And he says, not all ouds are made the same. Mm-hmm. I've actually innovated this one, and Ziryab is actually known to have added an additional course of strings to the oud.
Okay.
So initially it starts off with 2, goes to 3, 4, and then Ziryab adds a 5th. And he was a very kind of superstitious individual. Each course of strings represented something different. In those times, art and science were mixed. So music was not only considered an art, but it was also considered a science. So they viewed music, they didn't even call music music. That term, which is actually comes from the Greek the muses, music comes from the 9 muses. And it wasn't even used in the Middle East at that time. The term that we used was hendeset as-sawt, which is the architecture or the construct of sound, or the engineering of sound, if you will, right? And because it was viewed as this science. So he says, each one of these strings is, something unique to me. One represents air, one represents water, the other fire, and the other earth. And he says, and I've added a 5th string to represent the human soul.
Wow.
And so, and the humors and the elements were things that people would look at as almost what we call pseudoscience today, but as a pathway to empirical science, if you will.
Right. And there were always 4, right? The 4
there are
humors.
those 4 things, right?
Yeah.
And but we could say there's a 5th element too. There's ether, right? And there's other things that we've uncovered today as well.
Yeah. For sure.
And their counterparts. So regardless, this guy, Ziryab plays for Harun and just wows him. He's like, this is exactly what I was looking for. This is like that new sound, For me, I always looked at it as if it was like that. You remember that moment in Back to the Future where Marty McFly is playing and the guy gets on the phone with his cousin. Hey, Chuck, ostensibly Chuck Berry. I got that new sound for you. So that's what I always thought that moment to be.
Wow.
Right? And it's funny, too, because we're talking about tradition, fusion, and innovation and all of these things. The first thing that he sings to Harun, and this is what was recorded, is يا أيها الملك الميمون يا طائره هارون راحوا إليك الناس وابتكروا يا أيها الملك الميمون, which means, like, loosely translated, king of the believers, you are the soaring bird. People have come to you and left inspired to innovate. King of the believers. This is actually, I actually wrote an entire play about Ziryab and the oud called Ziryab, the Songbird of Andalusia. And so I kind of set that little piece to some music. It's kind of like, يا أيها الملك الميمون يا طائره هارون راح إليك الناس وابتكروا يا أيها الملك الميمون. And I sang it and this whole big thing there. So he does this and his teacher's kind of like astounded and his jaw drops. He's like, first of all, you refuse to use my instrument. Second of all, you've been kind of hiding this other innate aspect of your talent. And now you've won favor in the court of Harun al-Rashid. And like, what do you want to take my job? You want to take my bread?
Big flex.
And so he finishes it up. And the way the legend goes is his teacher goes up to him after he says, I've never really heard anything like that before again. Listen, I'm going to make you a deal. Here's a bag of money. You can get the hell out of Baghdad. Or you can stay and I can't guarantee you any safety. Which one? So, he's this young kid kind of, and he's married with, ostensibly with a family. And he decides to leave. And, at this time, why not? Because this is also at the same time that there's the furthest western frontier of Islam is growing in Andalusia, in Al-Andalus. And that's thriving. People are already hearing about it. Harun al-Rashid already started a translation movement to translate the works of the ancient Greeks, the Coptics, and to expound on these philosophies. Sciences are thriving in the Islamic world right now. So it's a point of expedition, right? So he leaves, traverses through Damascus, spends a little bit of time there, goes to Cairo, spends some time there, and lands in Kairouan, Tunisia, which actually at that time had the first great mosque, which was the Aqaba Mosque. And it actually served as a learning hub for Islam, for people from all over the world to kind of come to. All over the known world at that time, at least, before airplanes. So he lands there, stays there, and, you know, as artists do, they become artists of conscience, and they start to write about social justice and these sorts of things. So he becomes so big, this is Ziryab, that they name a neighborhood after him, Ziryabiya. But he gets a little bit of backlash, if you will, because the caliph at that time was Ziyadat Allah, is having a row with Baghdad and the Abbasid. And, you know, as it goes, everybody wanted to be the caliph. Everybody wanted to be the steward of Islam at this time. And so Ziryab pens a very damning poem to him, you know, calling him an illiterate crow and you're a coward, you know, if you were a leader, I would follow you, but you actually follow me. And, you know, kind of like in respect of the Abbasid.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of earned him a ticket outside of, to get exiled once again out of Tunisia. And it was okay because he had received an invitation by the Emir of Cordoba in Andalusia at the time, Abdurrahman I. So he decides to take him up on it and goes and traverses North Africa, crosses the Straits of Gibraltar, and lands himself in Cordoba. And Gibraltar, I say that all of these anglicized names, Gibraltar is Jebel Tariq. Jebel Tariq, because Tariq ibn Zayd was the first person to cross over in 711 into Al-Andalus. But when you uncover little gems like this guy, like Ziryab, who ends up taking the Oud all the way to Cordoba, Spain, and he gets there, and Amir Abdurrahman I has already passed away. He's disheartened. He starts to leave. His son, Abdurrahman II, is in charge. And he has in his court a head musician who happens to be Sephardic Jewish and says, look, I know this guy. You got to get him. So they go and they find him and said, look, he's got a meeting with you, and he can meet with you, and he'd love to talk to you. So he comes back up, meets with Amir Abdurrahman II, and basically he bestows upon him the title of Minister of Culture. And in fact, all of this, I'm telling you, is not even just hearsay. There is a 15th century Algerian scholar by the name of Al-Makkari. And Al-Makkari wrote an anthology, a huge volume of books about Al-Andalus and the history of Al-Andalus. And he is the source that nearly even all Western scholars go to. I've read stuff in English and in Spanish, and I'm like, man, I've read this before somewhere. And I go back to the volumes what I used for research. I'm like, that's like literally word for word translated from this guy's book written in Arabic, which you can find in PDF online, by the way. And so I'm fascinated because in this book, I'm finding poems written by Ziryab, poems written by his children, stories. Now, what's fascinating is it describes in detail even what Ziryab was paid by the Emir, like to the T. Like, I'm going to give you this much dunams in this particular land. You're going to get this much as your salary, as your stipend for being Minister of Culture. This is what I'd like for you to do. I'm like, all of these riches are here. Why is this not in history books all around the world? Right? This was the roots of the New World. This is where they spoke Arabic for 700 years. This is why Spanish has over 5,000 Arabic words in it. Even the word ustedes is the formal term of saying you all or you in a formality way, comes from ustes.
No
Ole,
way.
ale, 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 ale. comes when people say Allah, 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 Allah.
Allah.
Ohala comes from when people say inshallah, and it means the same thing. So sometimes, though, people don't want to identify or give credit where it's due, which is why this history is omitted or whitewashed. And so I found it like, here's my instrument and my music leading me right down another path here, a rabbit hole of history that is so seldom spoken about. And we know the reason why. Because if they gave credit to a people that they've vilified in the past 20 years or so, or even more, really, then how can we legitimize doing what we do to them? How can we legitimize or justify the people that gave us modern medicine, modern surgical tools, astronomy, languages, mathematics? I can go on. I can go on and on, but that it really stuck with me in a way that was visceral. You know what I mean? And what made it even more poignant was Ziryab goes straight to work, right? With all of this work, and he gets the music to go, and he gets culture to go, but then he realizes, there's more room here. These Castilians and these people here were not as civilized as they might imagine, So he brings this knowledge from the East that, Baghdad is incidentally, just for clarity, is not only Arab. Baghdad was Persian, Arab, South Asian. It was Turk in whatever Turk was, Central Asian.
Multicultural, yeah. That's
multicultural. It was Seljuk. It was a cosmopolitan place that historians, scientists, artists would congregate. We had cosmopolitan places. I think this is really fascinating too, because we're talking about Iraq as a cradle of civilization in many ways. And, tying back to your shawarma story, I remember seeing in the show Ugly Delicious that it was Iraqi Christian immigrants that brought tacos árabes to Mexico, which was a very interesting parallel, a correlation. So Ziryab gets to work, and then he introduces different things like the culinary arts. He coins a term that even the English started to use, from soup to nuts, meaning everything. So this Ziryab coins this term. And what he's talking about, he's like, we should eat our meals in courses, as they do in Baghdad, from soup to nuts. And talks about we should drink from glassware instead of this metalware. He brings a fashion of different hair cutting, of stylizing, opens a school of cosmetology there.
What?
Different clothing, robes, threads, telling people that, in the winter, wear colorful clothing, to, warm the body, but also to brighten the eye.
He was the first fashion designer.
He becomes an arbitrator of fashion and culture.
And a foodie. He was an artistic foodie.
He's not only a foodie. To this very day, there is a culinary arts school that's called Ziryab in Spain.
Wow.
And he has actual dishes called Ziryabi, or that there's a street in Cordoba called Calle Ziryab. So people revere him as this one of the first cultural purveyors of Cordoba and of Spain in general. He was more than just a foodie. There are actual cookbooks out there that are listed with his name on them.
That's incredible.
Wow.
I had no idea.
Crazy.
That's incredible.
Crazy stuff.
Food and music, right? Go together.
Uh-huh.
So this guy introduces Al-Oud, opens up a conservatory of music, and makes it accessible to all people, not just the elite, and to men and women, right? And so they attend his school, and eventually the theories and the practice and the pedagogy that he creates there becomes a model for other conservatories to open in Europe. So ostensibly the first real music conservatory, if you will, open to the public in Europe was by this guy in like the 9th century, right? And eventually this instrument, al-oud, becomes an instrument that Europeans like to call a lute. Al-oud becomes a lute. Lute is from al-oud. Other places have lauta, lauto, same instrument, al-oud, which in Arabic means wood or twig or branch, because it's made out of wood. But now anybody who makes anything that even resembles this, they call them a luthier, even if you make guitars. So eventually this becomes the European lute, you know, the thing that they play. And eventually that European lute becomes the guitar. Now the New World happens, right? But then 1491, the last emir of Granada submits the key to the city to the Catholic monarchs, Queen Isabella, King Ferdinand. They take over, and Islamic rule on the Iberian Peninsula kind of ends, right? But the influence does not end. The New World happens. Columbus wouldn't even be able to cross over the seas if it weren't for the astrolabe, which was an invention during the Islamic reign. And specifically, one person who really excelled at it was a woman from Syria named Miriam al-Astrolabiya.
Wow.
She created an astrolabe. Her father was an astrolabe maker as well. And these were basically GPS of the time, right?
Yeah.
So one of the first colonial settlements near Mexico was in Veracruz. And in Veracruz, they have a style of music that they call son jarocho. And many of the words even that they use to describe some of the music can actually still go back to Arabic. Like there's a whole style that they call jarabe music. And it's not Arabi or Arab. Jarabe is actually sharabi. Sharab is like syrup or a drink. A drink, right? And it's the same, I believe, in Urdu as well. And so there is this form of music. There are these styles of instruments that are very similar. They even have an instrument in Mexico called laúd. In Cuba, there's an instrument called laúd. And if you've ever watched or listened to the Buena Vista Social Club, they actually have a musician on there named Barbarito Torres who plays laúd. And he plays a song on there like this. So this led me down this path. I'm like, all right, what's the connection between Arabs and Mexicans?
What was the name of the song that you just played?
The song I just played is called Chan Chan, and it's by Buena Vista Social Club.
Beautiful.
But you hear this. Now, mind you, we can't ignore also the huge African influence on music in Latin America, particularly in Veracruz, in Cuba, in Brazil, in Peru. Now, a lot of that was due to the slave trade, but even that is so it's convoluted sometimes. People conflate so many different things and don't realize, like, many of these enslaved West Africans were also coming from Muslim predominant countries. So the music that they were listening to was also already not just traditional music. It was music that was old and new. There was, just by virtue of the adhan, which comes with it a music theory that Ziryab brought from Iraq all the way to Spain, called maqam, that eventually becomes nuba. This is also in Africa. Anywhere you find a stem or somebody singing or calling to prayer, even in Kashmir, Pakistan, Indonesia, all the way to California, they're doing it in maqam with a music theory that's embedded in the music theory of the West, embedded in the music theory of Africa, embedded in the music theory of Latin America as well. If we don't think that the old influences the new and then inspires the new to create something that will eventually become old again as well, then we're fooling ourselves. We need to understand that all of that we give, if we want to keep it alive, it can't be just set in stone, and that's it. Tradition is organic. Culture is organic. And that's how we identify that a people are organic. It's like, it goes back to like saying that, yeah, my family's from Palestine, so was Jesus, but there's still people in Palestine, yeah, Buddha was, from South Asia, from India, but that doesn't mean there are no more people there, So this instrument makes its way from Iraq to Spain to Latin America, eventually becomes the guitar. And that acoustic guitar eventually becomes the electric guitar, right? So I told you, we talked about this story before, Abes, about a guy in California.
This is the Dick Dale story?
Dick Dale.
Yeah, it's the Dick Dale story. I love this story.
Okay. So Dick Dale, whose real name was Richard Mansour.
It gets me every time.
Right? You know, that's the same with a lot of people out there, right? A lot of people, except Russell Peters.
There's also Freddie Mercury, but obviously not Arab, but obviously Middle Eastern background. And
yeah, he was. He grew up in Zanzibar, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and he was Sri Lankan, but he was Parsi.
yeah,
He was Parsi,
Incredible.
yeah. So Dick Dale. Here's his dad and his uncle playing a song on oud and the darbuka, the percussion drum. And that song was a song that he heard, and he's just like, man, and he's playing guitar. And he had a very good relationship. He was friends with Leo Fender. And many people might not know who Leo Fender is, but many people have heard of the Fender guitar,
Yes.
the Fender guitar amplifier. That's the inventor. So Dick Dale, Richard Mansour, and Leo Fender are very good friends. And Dick says to Leo, he's like, I want to play guitar as fast and as hard as Gene Krupa plays the drums. And Gene Krupa is this famous jazz drummer who he hit the drums like he was, killing them. And just really hard hitting drummer, but fantastic, legendary, right? And he's like, okay, so he invents these different prototypes of amplifiers. Mansour would keep playing them, and they would just get louder, and they'd blow them out, and he'd bring him another one. He's like, I need something more powerful. I need something more new. And I'm sitting there thinking in my mind, like, here's that same cycle of people always looking for something new from back at Harun al-Rashid's time to the 20th century, right? So over 1,000 years later. And he's like, I need something more. I need more power. So he gets them, and finally, the twin reverb amp comes out of all of this. It's the powerful amp that he wants, and now he can play that song nice, hard, and loud. And the song that he heard his dad and uncle playing, he ends up recording it, sounding more like this. Right?
wow.
So he ends up playing this, records it, and what comes out of this lineage of maqam music coming out of the 9th century, 8th century in Baghdad, going to Cordoba, the invention of the guitar, spreading its wings all the way to Latin America, the regular guitar, acoustic guitar turning into the electric guitar, and some kid in California who hears his dad and uncle playing it on this instrument, he records this song called Miserlou, which incidentally means girl from Egypt, right? We still don't know who wrote the song, right? But it's a popular standard. To this guy in the 1960s, creating an American genre of music called surf rock.
Yeah.
So talk about the American immigrant story, and just tracing things back to their roots, and this coming out of it. It's a fascinating thing. And now the song, people call it the Pulp Fiction song.
Yeah.
Black Eyed Peas used it as a sample. It was in a T-Mobile commercial, for goodness sake. You make it to a car commercial or a cell phone commercial, you've made it.
So what was the original Arabic version of that Pulp Fiction song?
Well, Miserlou, Girl from Egypt, it was a piece that was not just Arab, because Arabs, Turks, and Greeks all played it. I played in a Greek band for 2 years, and we used to play it all the time. And it would sound more like, I could play the whole thing for you, but you get the idea. A little more slower, a little bit more ornate, not as rock heavy. And if you read on, I mean, there's a whole Wikipedia entry on just this song alone, right?
Wow.
But the melody itself could have been around for quite some time. That's the whole thing about these regions. I grew up playing a lot of Middle Eastern music, but I played Assyrian music, I played Turkish music, I played Greek music, Arab music. And part of the reason was because music theory was relatively the same. They all used maqam music tradition, right? But more than that, a lot of the melodies were the same too. Like we would do one song as a Fairuz song, which is Nassam Alayna al-Hawa. But there's an exact same song that's almost identical with Greek words called Mia Fotia, my fire. And so I play this, and then the Greek guys were just like, in the band, like, yeah, it's Mia Fotia, man. I played Nassam Alayna Hawa from Fairuz. And they're contemporaries of each other. And then you just kind of stop and you think, I'll give you another example. Maybe this is something you guys can relate to. Anybody here ever hear of the movie Sholay?
Yeah. The old Bollywood movie. Yeah.
Yeah, you remember that song in that movie? Mahabuba, 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 oh, right? So there's a Greek song that's exactly the same thing. And it's called Do You Love Me, Do You Love Me? Music, even to this day, there was an entire documentary written about one song that is almost like a Turkish national anthem, right? An unofficial anthem. And it's called Uskuda. And it goes like this. Now, that song exists in Arabic, Greek, Bosnian, Serbian, Turkish. I've heard this song in other Asian languages. Many countries claim that this is their song. So much so that a Bulgarian filmmaker made an entire documentary about this song.
Wow.
And aptly titled it, Whose Is This Song?
And I'm sure people will fight over no, this is mine.
Oh,
yeah.
Not only did they fight, Abbas, she went interviewing people, and the one line that really stuck out, it became political for them. Maybe this is a good metaphor about what you were talking about earlier, when people are just like, tradition, if you take a tradition and mess with it, it's bad. I've been doing that all my life. I've had no choice but to do that all my life. And the whole thing is boils down to one thing: respect.
Right.
If you respect another tradition and you do something with it, with sincerity, with ikhlas, as we would say, right? Then you've given your dues. You've paid respect to this tradition, but you maintain it, you pay homage to it, and of course you renew it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I understand, even if you do that, you're still going to have your conservative naysayers who are like, no, it's supposed to be like this forever and ever, and that's it, enshrined in a museum, encapsulated in gold.
No, that's very actually similar to a lot of stuff that I've been seeing on Facebook. We have our foodie group on Facebook, and people complain about biryani, for example. It has to be a specific way, or shawarma. It has to be a specific way, specific ingredients. Otherwise, it's not a real shawarma or it's not real biryani, and you're not supposed to
Yeah.
call it that. And then I was kind of, debating with somebody. I said, look, it's, just take it easy. It's food. It's not like anything crazy. And food, just like music, just like everything else, changes over time. It changes when you go to a different city, different village, different country. It evolves, and people change it. And so as long as it tastes good, it's all good.
Right? And the other thing in the end too, it's like, all right, well, 600 years ago, a whole hemisphere of the earth didn't have tomatoes or corn. Let's see Italian cuisine without tomatoes.
or desi food without garlic.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like sometimes some things are just also based on geography. You know,
Yep.
There's a term in ethnomusicology we use called bimusicality or trimusicality, and it's synonymous with somebody being bilingual, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you don't just know a few phrases here or there. You dig deep. Like I can say I'm bimusical in Middle Eastern and Indian music, for example. I studied Indian music. I studied tabla for 5 years. I taught myself to speak Hindi. Many different things, right? So you really dig deep into the culture. Mm-hmm. And my friend, a Turkish musician, Mohammad Abutaha, he coined another term. He's like, yeah, I don't like musical tourism. Mm. He's like, if you want to really dig into something, don't be just a tourist in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same with what you're saying with the food. It's not to say you can't experiment, you can't bring in, first, cardamom, imagine that spice that, imagine some dishes in Sweden, even, cakes or different places around the world that are signature with that spice.
Ronnie, you represent music from different places, but also like where you are in space and time.
Alhamdulillah, man. That's all you could say. Is keep an eye. I live my life, based on, God created us into nations and tribes so that we may get to know one another. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And my mom always adds to it, Allah khalaqna linata'araf wa linatahabab, and to love one another as well. I think that's the thing where maybe if some of these colonialists and settlers took that little part from the religion or from what we've done to love one another, not to kill one another, not to conquer one another, I think it's still possible. And I think that food and music are definitely ways that will open the path.
Fully agree. That's the, and I always wonder, like, when we finally get in touch with alien life forms in space, it's going to be their food and music that we understand them through.
It's like, what's your fuel and what's your pleasure,
Yeah.
What do you resonate?
Well, that's what happened in that old movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They were playing music, right? The aliens, to try to communicate with us. Right? That's an old movie. You check it out, boss.
Yeah, I remember seeing that when I was a kid.
I've read about that movie in the history books, yes.
Ancient history.
Whether it is through musical instruments or through delicious food, culture evolves over time. We interact with others, crossing our geographic and ethnic boundaries to transcend superficial differences and build new and beautiful things together. Art and food are both great markers of culture. And what an honor and a pleasure it is to be able to observe, experience, and be a part of this intergenerational evolution.
Thanks again so much for tuning in to the Artistic Foodies podcast. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Google Podcasts.
Be sure to find us on Facebook and Instagram to stay tuned for more episodes as well as bonus content. You can also have access to all of our episodes at theartisticfoodies.com.
As always, this podcast has been brought to you by Halal Fest Incorporated and Gamma, Gathering All Muslim Artists.